Hi, I'm Paul Edwards, author of the Mourner's Woods book series, and first and foremost, a monster kid. Today I'm reading Famous Monsters of Filmland, issue number 103 from December 1973. I thought some of you might enjoy looking through this great vintage monster magazine with me, just in case you don't own your own copy of Famous Monsters of Filmland, issue 103. And together we can see what kinds of vintage monster goodness is in here. Famous Monsters of Filmland, issue 103. This issue, special tribute to Lon Chaney Jr. Well, unfortunately, the reason for this is that Lon Chaney Jr. had just recently died as of this publication in 1973. This Gill-Man, the creature from the Black Lagoon, this was not a Lon Chaney Jr. role. This just happens to be the cover that they went with. They probably had this planned, and then, Chaney died, and they went with this cover instead of a Chaney cover. Probably for time reasons. Lon Chaney Jr. got plenty of coverage, though, in this magazine. Also, in this issue, we're going to get Blackula and Planet of the Apes, staples of the 70s. Here's an autographed picture. To a fine gentleman, Forey. That's Forrest J. Ackerman. Thanks, Lon Chaney. So, Lon Chaney Sr. was a great actor in the silent film days, especially in horror films. He was prominent for doing horror films. And he never wanted his son, Creighton, to become an actor. Only after Lon Chaney Sr. died did his son, Creighton, go into acting. And the studio absolutely insisted that he call himself Lon Chaney Jr., even though that was not his name, because Lon Chaney Sr. had been a very popular actor. And what they did was they called the son Lon Chaney Jr. for about 4 or 5 years, and then they just started billing him as Lon Chaney. As if people were going to get confused and think that the elder Lon Chaney was still alive and making movies. So Lon Chaney Jr. is how he's remembered, and we'll be seeing him in just a minute. First, let's see Blackula. Younger viewers might not remember, in the early 1970s, there was a trend in low-budget movies called blaxploitation. These were exploitation films targeting an African-American audience. Usually they were crime movies and thrillers, but sometimes they were horror films. And among them was this, Blackula, a black vampire who had been bitten by Count Dracula. Also, there was Blackenstein, a African-American Frankenstein monster. There was Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde. And to crown the series of ridiculous titles, they were going to make their coup de grace, and they never wound up making this one, but they had plans to make Black the Ripper. So that gives you an idea of what kind of level of tastes you were getting here. However, they actually did get a truly great actor to play Blackula, which makes the movie watchable. And in fact, it's really not that bad. There was even a sequel, Scream Blackula Scream. And if you are a young enough viewer, you might know that that is a Rob Zombie song now, Scream Blackula Scream. Well, that's where it comes from. Okay. So, we get our piece on... One second. We get our piece on William Marshall, who played Blackula, and he's reminiscing here about the old horror films that he enjoyed when he was a boy. He was especially a fan of Boris Karloff. Actually, he says in here that Karloff was the actor that he preferred, but in terms of the movie that scared him most, he named the original Invisible Man, the 1933 Invisible Man. There's William Marshall in his Blackula makeup. And there he is putting the bite on one of a number of victims. Au revoir, Captain Nemo. Another tribute. I'm not sure why his goes before Lon Chaney Jr.'s, though. Wait, there's tributes everywhere. Looks like a lot of people from the fantastic film industry had a bad year in 1973. Looks like we lost a lot of them, sadly. So it's almost impossible to process this now, because when 1977 came along and Star Wars came out, Star Wars took over the entire world of science fiction for a few years. But for most of the 1970s, there was a different franchise before Star Wars came out. Planet of the Apes was really popular for the first half of the 1970s, and it was over-marketed. There was market saturation with Planet of the Apes toys, puzzles, picture books, coloring books, stickers. Planet of the Apes was the sci-fi property that was super marketed, and there was just tons of interest in Planet of the Apes until the day Star Wars came out, and then everybody just dropped Planet of the Apes like a ton of bricks, and everything was about Star Wars. So this magazine from 1971, it's no surprise that they have a nice piece on one of the Planet of the Apes films here. This is from the original, but these atom bomb worshippers are from the first sequel, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Yep. I still clearly remember Dr. Zaius action figure. Oh, The Last of Veronica Lake. The cutest pixie who ever rode a broomstick. So she was in a movie which it was called I Married a Witch, and that movie inspired the later TV series Bewitched. It wasn't the same characters, but it was the same essential story. Wow, everything here is tributes. George McCready now. This is a pretty maudlin issue. Jack Hawkins. Oh, from Theater of Blood. Yep. There's a Vincent Price one. Okay, here's the main piece now. Lon is gone, like father, like son. I'm glad they didn't try to make a funny caption, but I see that Forrest J. Ackerman couldn't resist at least messing around a little with the title. Oh boy. Okay, so Lon Chaney Jr. Is sort of divisive among horror movie fans. Let's put it this way. Everybody agrees that his father, Lon Chaney Sr., was a superb actor. You're never going to hear anybody put down Lon Chaney Sr.'s performances. There is some debate about the quality of Lon Chaney Jr.'s catalog of work and whether he was a great actor or not so great an actor. My view, and I've said this in other videos, is that Lon Chaney Jr. was a very good actor when he stayed in his lane and played parts that were appropriate for him. Look how good he was in Of Mice and Men. He was superb. The problem is the money-hungry studio just couldn't resist capitalizing on the name of Lon Chaney, so they kept casting him in usually horror movies and thrillers, in parts that he did not belong in. The most egregious example was that they cast him to play Count Dracula in Son of Dracula. Lon Chaney Jr. was not a good Dracula. He was great as the Wolfman. He was even good as the Frankenstein monster, although he was no Karloff. And he did a really solid job as the Mummy, too, in 3 Mummy movies. Those were all roles that were appropriate to him. A big lunk of a guy. And, you know, he was right at home playing Lawrence Talbot as the Wolfman. That character, especially in the original The Wolfman, that character was a perfect fit for Lon Chaney Jr. Dracula was not. He was not, Lon Chaney Jr. was not a sophisticated, elegant person. Dracula was portrayed better in worse movies, like by John Carradine in House of Dracula and House of Frankenstein. So yes, I feel Lon Chaney was a good actor when he stayed in his lane, but unfortunately, he kept getting cast in things that were not appropriate roles for him. He was a likable everyman. That was the kind of role that fit him. So it says the 5 faces of Lon, but they're all Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. You know, the other classic monsters, like the Invisible Man and the Frankenstein monster, they were played by different actors in different movies. But Lon Chaney Jr. was the only actor who ever played the Wolfman in the classic monster movies. He often would get cast in parts as either a big bully, like in The Alligator People, or as sort of a big dummy, frankly. He could play those kind of parts quite well. And you know, if you want to know now what films Lon Chaney Jr. was in, you could just Google it. In the old days, when this magazine came out in 1973, you didn't have a ready reference to tell what movies he had been in, until a magazine like this came along and printed a list of his, what we would call his filmography. Kids would save this, and they would look through the TV listings each week, which came in the newspaper, to see if any of these movies were coming on. It was the only way that some kids would ever know about some of these films. Oh, Lionel Atwill was bad in this one. Bad as in evil, not as in a bad actor. He was a great actor. Yep, The Black Castle. A big, brutish bad guy. That was a good role for Lon Chaney Jr. This is a little bit better. Here you get more variety, different pictures of Lon Chaney Jr. At one point, he just decided he was going to grow a mustache. I don't think he asked the studio's permission, and I don't think he cared whether they gave it or not. But he had it in a couple of his films. That was a little bit later in his golden era in the 40s. So this is Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman, and his co-star in that film, the female lead, was played by Evelyn Ankers. This picture has a secret sort of funny side to it, although it's funny by itself. But the studio kept casting Lon Chaney and Evelyn Ankers in the same movies, thinking that they had great on-screen chemistry together. But they didn't like each other in the real life. There was some sort of a dispute between them about who had a bigger dressing room in a particular production. And I don't know who was in the right and who was in the wrong, but I do know that feelings were hurt and they didn't like each other from then on. but the studio just kept making them work together. So, you know, Evelyn Ankers probably did feel like throttling him at some point. Lon Chaney Jr., like Karloff before him, and like Lon Chaney Sr. before either of them, suffered for his craft. It was a lot to put the Wolfman makeup on him. A lot. Took hours every day. Here, Lon Chaney Jr.'s widow has written an open letter to his fans. Isn't that nice? Sadly, Lon Chaney Jr.'s very last film was the not very good Dracula versus Frankenstein. And he did not play Dracula or Frankenstein in that film. He didn't even play the Mad Doctor. He played the brutish assistant. And he was in very poor health. They made his character mute because he could barely speak. I mean, in real life, he could barely speak at this point. He was so sick. So they made him just a big lumbering mute who was killing people at the Mad Doctor's request. It was not a very glorious way to end his career. But let me tell you something about Lon Chaney Jr. in his tribute here, and about all these other people from the industry whose tributes are there. It's natural to feel sad when an artist or performer that you care about dies. It's natural to feel sad. As I'm recording this video, a lot of people all around the world are sad because Ozzy Osbourne just died. But any sort of a creative person, like an actor, musician, a writer, like I am a writer, any sort of a creative person, nothing would make them happier than to know that people kept on enjoying their works years after they had died. Nothing would make Lon Chaney Jr. happier than to know that, 50 years after he had died, people are still watching his movies and enjoying his work. So it's really not sad. It's really happy. It's not happy that the person died. I don't mean that. But it's happy that people are still enjoying the products of their work after they're gone. All right, You Axed For It was a regular feature where people would write in and request pictures from certain movies or pictures of certain actors. This is sort of a tough one. It does say who it is here, but without looking, do you know what this is? That is a Martian from The Angry Red Planet. Yeah, remember them peeking in the porthole at Gerald Moore? Oh my gosh. Oh. Yep. Didn't end well for Michael Gough. It never ends well for Michael Gough. Oh, here's a great one. This is a great full-page picture of Boris Karloff in The Bride of Frankenstein. Major vampire attack here. All right, time for the crazy ads. Famous Monsters t-shirt. Genuine monster kits. Wonder if you can make your own monster. Nice. Books to drive a stake through your light heart. Wow. Hardcover books of horror and fantasy. Ooh, Robbie the Robot. You can never get too much Robbie the Robot. It was first seen in Forbidden Planet. And then he resurfaced in The Invisible Boy and a number of other productions. Yeah. Okay, even I can't keep track of everything. I gotta say, I have no idea who Heidi Saha is. Do you? I do not remember this person at all. So if you remember, please feel free to enlighten me in the comments. So I know enough about this stuff to know that I don't know a lot about it. There's always more to learn with the vintage horror and classic monsters. There's always more to learn. I still say the reason that they would sell books in the back of this, half the reason was so that as a kid you would buy a book and say, look, Mom and Dad, I'm not just rotting my brain with this stuff. I'm actually reading a book. Oh, I also get comics in here. Green Lantern and the Green Arrow. Nice. Do you remember these Star Trek books? Now, if you were to buy a Star Trek book, and there's a zillion of them, it would be, you know, an individual story. But before that came along, they sold these compilations of short Star Trek stories. I had a few of them. I don't remember which numbers off the top of my head. But there were like 3 or 4 short Star Trek stories in these books. This is not a typo. There actually was a movie called Dinosaurus. That was the name of the movie, Dinosaurus. They didn't make a mistake. A lot of good choices here, but Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein wins for me. Well, although you do get, well, look, you have Ghidra, which is, you know, an Americanization of King Ghidorah. But here's Ghidra, but then here's Battles of Ghidra. So is this just from the original Ghidra the Three-Headed Monster? And this includes footage from like Monster Zero and Destroy All Monsters, that sort of thing? Because when you think about it, how many movies had King Ghidorah been in as of 1973 when this came out? He had been in Ghidra the Three-Headed Monster, Monster Zero, Destroy All Monsters, and he had only just been in Godzilla on Monster Island, released in some markets as Godzilla versus Gigan. So I'm not too sure a movie that recent would be in here. I think it would just be, and you know, the battles that he had in the first 3 film appearances. I don't know what the difference is between the Masters of Horror and the Masters of Terror. If you know, please enlighten me. But there is a difference between the words, because Boris Karloff himself used to say he didn't like the phrase horror films, he liked the phrase terror films. So, horror film soundtracks. Ooh. Harryhausen Spectacular here. The Sinbad movies and Jason and the Argonauts. These are reels of films from the movies. So you're not getting the whole movie, but you're getting, you know, the Harryhausen parts, which is all any of us cared about. I'm not buying ants through the mail. Thank you. Even if you wanted an ant farm, is buying them through the mail really the way to go? I can see that going very wrong. Dinosaurs. Ooh, creepy crawly castle game. Or Star Trek. So I'm sure you know this, but just in case you need to be reminded, Star Trek was canceled after 3 seasons. it had its fans, but it just wasn't as big a hit with the general public as it should have been to justify going on anymore. But then they started syndicating it and showing it in reruns on UHF channels. And once Star Trek went into reruns, it became way more popular with the general public than it had ever been when it was on primetime. So in 1973 here, Star Trek was really starting to catch on, even though it wasn't currently, new episodes were not currently in production. So it's no surprise that there were Star Trek goodies for sale here. I did have a Klingon ship model when I was a kid. This is kind of maudlin. Lon Jr., Frankenstein, joins Lon Sr., Eric of the Opera, through death's door. I suppose that's supposed to be heartwarming, but that's just kind of weird to me. But I mean, they were trying to be respectful in their famous Monsters of Filmland way. Ooh, zombie mask. You'll be the death of the party in your horrible zombie mask. So lifelike that people will surely think you're dead. Realistic hair and skin, just like a real zombie. Yuck. That's pretty wild. If you enjoy classic monsters and vintage horror, check out my book series, the Mourner's Woods books. I'm self-published on Amazon. I read stories that all take place in a haunted forest in the American Northwest, Mourner's Woods. A completely new cast of characters enters Mourner's Woods in each book, and each group encounters a different kind of peril. Ghosts, monsters, banshees, giant spiders. But the most dangerous threat that they always encounter is the other characters who hiked in with them, because betrayal is a very common occurrence in Mourner's Woods. And the characters may not have to fight only against a monster, but against each other. My books, again, are the Mourner's Woods books. I try to capture the feel and tone of vintage horror and 20th century monster movies in written form within a contemporary setting. My name again is Paul Edwards. Thanks very much for taking some time to look through Famous Monsters of Filmland, issue 103 with me. I just love this creature from the Black Lagoon cover. I'll see you in Mourner's Woods.